I hear that you can't hear me. Is that right? Is that all right? Can you hear me? Bob, I don't have to ask you. You know, you're up here. I'm going to open with a poem called God, Show Me How. God, give me the wisdom to discern just where I am most needed, and grant nobody's cry for help to me shall go unheeded. Let me see into those hearts who hide their deepest pain, and show me how to say the words to bring them hope again. Lord, you have given me so much, and now I want to share the love with which you shower me with people everywhere. Though I brought nothing to this world, and that is how I'll leave it, may all my deeds ring out with faith the way that I believe it. This afternoon we have a real treat in that Thomas Murt, former commissioner of Upper Moreland Township, is going to talk to us about his experiences in Iraq, and I'm certain he's going to talk about some of those people that we want to share so much with in the future. Tom Murt resigned his commissioner's position in January 2003 when he was called to active duty with U.S. Army 4th Infantry Division. He served for 18 months and was stationed in Tikrit, Saddam Hussein's hometown, for 12 months. He served on several civil affairs commissions in northern Iraq, and I'm certain he's going to have a lot of good information for us, and I'm certain we'll have a lot of questions. So without further delay, Tom Murt.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me here today. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay. That was a very nice introduction, Jim. I appreciate that. I am a resident of Upper Moreland Township. I was born and raised in Hatboro. I lived in this area my whole life. My civilian job is over at Penn State Abington. I teach at Penn State. I'm also a counselor. And I've been on the staff at Penn State since 1992. I am an Army reservist, and my unit is up at the Willow Grove Naval Air Station. It's the 656 Area Support Group. And in January of 2003, 2 years ago, I was called to active duty, and as many reservists were, just before the combat started in Iraq. And the way that they called us to active duty was very informal. You know, you got a phone call from someone you don't know, and then you get a fax or some kind of official verification from your unit that you've been transferred to a unit that's mobilizing. The unit to which I was assigned was the 442 Quartermaster Company, which is a reserve unit based in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania. Bellefonte, as many of you are probably aware, is located just north of State College. And unbeknownst to me, it was a shower and laundry company. It was a unit of about 120 soldiers that went into combat areas and set up shower and laundry operations for the soldiers in the forward areas. And we mobilized. I was told to go to Fort Drum, New York. Fort Drum, New York is above Buffalo, up near the Canadian border. And we mobilized there, and we were there probably for about a month and a half or so. During that time, we were making sure that our equipment was functional. There was a list of items that a unit must have to bring into the field when they deploy. And needless to say, we were short many of those items. And famous last words by the Army is that you're going to get that when you're in theater, and that was not accurate. But we mobilized there. The soldiers were expected to qualify with their weapons and learn some basic skills and first aid, learn some information about weapons of mass destruction, how to protect yourself, how to don your protective mask. In addition, soldiers were given some very, very cursory, brief training about depleted uranium, which is very, very prevalent in Iraq. And there was other modes of training, information about cultural awareness, learning information about the Arabic culture and the Muslim religion and so forth, which is very, very critical when we were overseas. And after about a month and a half, we boarded our plane up at Fort Drum. We were flown to Kuwait. As most of you veterans were when you went overseas, we didn't know where we were going either. And so we landed in Kuwait City under very, very heavy armed guard. It was really very, very evident that when we landed in Kuwait City that, you know, things were very, very serious here. And there were armed guards all over the place protecting us when we got off the airplane. When we went into the receiving area, I think it was called Camp America or Camp Victory. And we were there for a couple days, and then we were sent out to the Kuwaiti desert at a camp called Camp New York, which is really in the middle of nowhere, like all those camps are really. But we went out to Camp New York, and pretty much we just waited around there for about a week, maybe even 3 weeks, while our equipment was coming in. Our equipment was railroaded to Galveston, Texas from Fort Drum, New York, and then it was put on a ship and then brought over the ocean. So we're kind of waiting in Kuwait for our equipment, our vehicles to land. And when the vehicles came in, we made sure that they were all functional. And any problems we had, we tried to get the guys in the motor pool, the soldiers in the motor pool, to get everything up and flying. And then we were given a mission. After about 2 weeks in Kuwait in the desert, we were really very, very eager to get a mission because you get very, very punchy. You're living on top of one another. We had, you know, rooms about this size with maybe, you know, 50 or 60 soldiers sleeping on top of one another. So it was really, you know, a little bit gratifying when they finally said, you guys have a mission. You're to drive to northern Iraq, north of Baghdad. We're about 120 miles north of Baghdad in Saddam's hometown of Tikrit, Tikrit. And we didn't know exactly what we were going to be doing, but it was a 2-day convoy up to northern Iraq. And during the time up there, at nights we would just sleep out of the side of the road. We'd sleep in our vehicle, sleep on the ground. We didn't have any cots or anything like that, so we were just out in the elements. And we had to pull guard duty because there were still some insurgents in the area. It wasn't a secure, none of the country was actually secure. And so we, you know, it took us 2 days to get up to Tikrit, and we were garrisoned on a former Iraqi Air Force base. We called the base FOB Spiker, which is Forward Operating Base Spiker, and it was named after Michael Spiker, who was a Navy pilot who was shot down during the first Gulf War, and his plane to this day was never found. They don't know whatever happened to him. So he was the namesake of this base where we were located. And once we landed at FOB Spiker, we set up operations, and you know, needless to say, soldiers that are living in the desert, for soldiers that are living in the desert, a warm shower, not a hot shower, but a warm shower, and laundry services are very, very, very important, and very, very important for morale. So they're really glad to see us come and set up operations. And we were, you know, probably doing, I wasn't doing it personally. Actually, my personal assignment, I was appointed to be the driver and the bodyguard for our commander. And our commander is a Pennsylvania State Trooper, was a Pennsylvania State Trooper, still is, and he was from Williamsport. And I'm not sure why he picked me. I guess he liked the way that I drive. I used to drive him around on Fort Drum, and I guess he thought I was a safe driver, so he picked me to be his driver, which was a little bit unusual to have a staff sergeant. I was an E6 to be the driver for the company commander. Usually it's an E3 or an E4, so, but that didn't bother me. We just, you know, accepted whatever assignments we were given. But again, the mission of our company was to do shower and laundry, and the soldiers on that post were, again, very, very happy to see us. And, you know, when you're in a position like that, or a supplier or anything like that, you know, soldiers constantly want to cut deals with you. You know, if you do my laundry today, if I get a 24-hour turnaround, you know, I'll make sure that you guys get mail twice tomorrow, or you guys can pick up your mail at any time of day. Usually you're supposed to pick up mail between 11 and 1. And the people in the postal operations, we allowed them to drop off their laundry any day of the week, not just their assigned day. And they were very, very reciprocating about what they were going to do for our unit. So we were, constantly cutting deals like that. But we did it in order to, help our unit and help our soldiers. We also did this for internet access. Many of our soldiers were very anxious to get on the internet as frequent as possible and to email home, email their loved ones, say they're okay. There were frequently attacks into Crit, so many soldiers died there. And after every attack, soldiers were anxious to get on the internet and email home. I was like that myself, trying to email my wife and my children saying, I heard about the explosion, don't worry, I'm safe, everything's okay. And there were certain units that had internet access, like a medical unit, where they had to get on the internet if they had illnesses that they couldn't diagnose. They want to find out some information about, different kind of insect bites and things like that. And so they had internet access, and they would allow us to get on their internet different times of the day, depending on how our unit would give them laundry service and shower service. But that was, I think that's probably common, probably in World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and in every conflict, soldiers help one another like that. But the internet access when we arrived in Iraq was not good. It was very, very slow, and it was very, very scarce. And as time went on, and more communications and Signal Corps people were able to set up inside Iraq, the internet access became more plentiful. It became faster. They actually had a building that they earmarked for internet use. It was open 24 hours a day, so regardless of when you were on duty, you could always stop by there and get on the internet. Usually the wait was not too long. They had maybe 25 or 30 internet stations after a while. This was at the end, not in the beginning. And so soldiers, that was really very important. That was as important to morale as mail is. I know that many of you are veterans, and I don't know if you remember or not, but when you're going through some very, very trying times, and you're missing home, and you're taking casualties, and morale is not good, and you get a letter from home, it really has a very, very positive impact, as long as it's a good letter, on your morale. And that's still the case. And I used to write a little column for the Willow Grove Guide, and I used to encourage the readers, if you know of any soldiers or Marines or any military people in Iraq, make sure you write to them as much as possible, because it really does have a very, very positive impact on morale. And it's the same way with care packages. No matter what you send, the soldiers and the Marines and all of our service people are very, very grateful for that. We also had very, very limited phone access in the beginning. The phone access was very sporadic. You would be in the middle of a conversation that would cut off. And then as time went on, and as I said, as the Signal Corps people went in and set up more sophisticated communication networks, the phone service was much better. The transmission was much clearer, and you were able to get on and stay on a lot longer, and there were many more phone ports that were available. Phone access was good. It was nice to be able to call home whenever you really felt the need to, but there were many, many soldiers that I would see them on the telephone, and they would be in tears, and obviously it was very, very emotional for them to call home, and it was really it was very, very hard on them. And I decided early on that I would only call if I really felt the need to. And I think I only called home in the entire year I was in Iraq 2, maybe 3 times. There was a few times I couldn't get through because my wife didn't recognize the number on caller ID, and so she didn't pick up the phone. But the phone access was very, very, very good, and towards the end. But as I said, phone calls could be very, very emotional sometimes. And as I said, I could see, it was very hard on some soldiers, and I decided that I wasn't going to call unless I really had to, or else I got an email from my wife that required it. Another thing I wanted to mention is that many, many people in our community, and some of you people here today, were very, very good to my family. And I wanted to tell you that I'm very grateful for that. I wish it's not possible to really articulate how many acts of kindness and generosity people, really afforded to my family. I mean, my wife and my 3 children were taken care of very, very well. And, there was always somebody in the community that was helping with child care or giving the kids rides to basketball and Little League and things like that. And it was really, I was very, very gratified that, so many people were stepping forward. People that my wife and I really didn't even know were stepping forward to, to help my wife with, with various things around the house. That was really, very gratifying. I'm grateful for that. Thank you. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the food. In the beginning, when we first got to Iraq, we were relegated to eat MREs, which are meals ready to eat, the former K rations that many of you probably, including my dad, had in World War II and Korea and Vietnam. And the MREs that are available nowadays are really not much to write home about. As a matter of fact, many of the Iraqis wouldn't eat them. They didn't. We thought we were doing somebody a favor when we would have, like, beef teriyaki or something like that, which you kind of eat out of the envelope, and we'd say, I'll give it to this Iraqi, and they would look at it and they would taste it and they would throw it on the ground. So even the Iraqis rejected these MREs. But I'm sorry?
You have to be trained.
Yeah, I guess it depends how hungry you are. But for the most part, they weren't bad. I mean, you could eat them for a while, but slowly the food got a little bit better. We had in our unit, we had a chuck wagon, like a mobile kitchen trailer, an MKT they called it. We had some cooks that were assigned to our unit, and they would go to the supply yard, and they would get large, big trays of, like, lasagna and things like that, and they would just cook it over a flame, and then, we would go through the line, and they would, scoop the food on like they do in MASH and in the movies and all. But that was once a day. We only got hot meal once a day. We were able to you could have as many MREs if you wanted. If you could have them for breakfast, lunch, and dinner if you wanted. But we would sometimes have fresh fruit, like 3 or 4 times a week. They would bring us a big case of apples or peaches or something like that. And the soldiers would eat that sometimes. As time went on, they actually opened 2 on our post. They opened 2 dining halls, which were operated by Kellogg, Brown and Root, which is a company that Vice President Cheney used to be the president of. But they were doing all the concessions, the food concessions, and the food was very good once the civilians took over. It wasn't bad. Most of the civilians that worked there were from another place. They were third country nationals, Filipinos, South Koreans, there were some Dutch, some Germans, some Italians, some Sudanese, some Pakistanis, Indians, and they would go, I guess they would take like a 6 or 7 month contract to work for Kellogg, Brown and Root, and go wherever they were assigned, and they were given accommodations. I saw the accommodations, and they were nothing to write home about for these, but I guess it was better than what they had in their home country. But they would work in the cafeteria, and the food was not bad. They really did a very good job there, but it was not an Army operation. It was a civilian operation. The normal duty day for our soldiers in our unit, we were actually split up when we got to Crit. We had some soldiers that were assigned to Balad. You may have seen that on the news. There were some soldiers assigned to Bakuba. You may have seen that in the news. There were some soldiers assigned to Mosul, which is northern Iraq, and we kept some soldiers in Tikrit. And again, these soldiers operated shower and laundry trailers for various sites. There was a site in East Tikrit, they called it East Tikrit, which was really what I would call the Wild West. It was like the Badlands. There was no barbed wire or fence or anything. These soldiers just kind of set up in the desert. They built berms, like a big earthen hill around the camp. It was a small camp, and the soldiers were out there for I guess maybe 2 to 3 months, and it was very, very desolate. There was no PX or anything like that, and it was really a hardship place to be. The only good thing is that the soldiers that went out there said there wasn't a lot of laundry to do, so they said we had a lot of downtime, but there was no place to go or really nothing to do. And they also had internet access. Since there were so few soldiers that, and there was a Signal Corps unit out there, they set up the internet, and you could really get on the internet whenever you wanted, so it had a little bit of an upside. My personal normal duty day is, I was usually up about 3:30 or 4, and I would usually try and run with another soldier in the morning on our post. It was very big and very flat, and we would go out jogging just about every day. The exercise was very, very critical, at least in my mind, to kind of relieving stress and just kind of clearing your mind, give you something to look forward to. We were running about 10 miles a day. That's how much stress we had, 10 miles a day's worth. But we were, you know, very, very fit. We used to run in the morning, then we would come back, we'd be home. We'd be back in the barracks, which were old Iraqi officers' quarters that had been bombed out during the war. And, you know, we would be back and ready for the day. And, you know, I was always up before the commander, and wherever he needed to go, I would take him there. And I was responsible for his safety and making sure he got to different places safely and so forth. One of the things well, actually, this was my favorite duty. I was also assigned to do a lot of civil affairs work. And we went out to the villages, we went out to the schools, we went out to the hamlets, and we did a lot of, I guess you would call it nation building. We rebuilt a lot of schools. Most of the work was done by Iraqi contractors. We were given a budget, and we would write a contract. We would have our JAG people, our lawyers, Army lawyers, write up a contract with the various Iraqi construction firms, and we would say, you know, we want the school rebuilt. Many of the schools had fallen into great disrepair. You know, they were taken over by the Republican Guard, or they were taken over by the Ba'ath Party, by the political party of Saddam Hussein and his supporters, and they would close down the school or take it over for a couple weeks and fire the teachers and then just leave. And the kids, if they wanted to go to school, would have to go to another village or would have to go to another place to, you know, to learn. And many of the children didn't do that. Their parents just would not send them to another village. It just wasn't safe. So a lot of the kids just stopped going to school. In many of the villages, if a village was thought of as being not pro-Saddam Hussein, if they were not being pro-Ba'ath Party, if they were being problematic, if they were making trouble, if they were complaining, the Ba'ath Party people would go in there and just turn off their electric, turn off their water, close down the school just for spite. So, you know, the people were pretty much conditioned to keep their mouths shut. Don't complain, don't say anything, even if you don't like Saddam Hussein, which many of them did not. Just don't say anything because something bad could happen, not just to you, to your family, but also to the village. So people just learned to keep their mouths shut. But as I said, the schools, I'm going to show you a picture of the schools in a minute, but the schools were in very, very bad shape. In all the schools I visited in Iraq, and I visited many of them, maybe 40 or 50, I never was in one school that had running water, telephones, electric, any kind of sanitary facilities, no flushable toilets. In the entire country, I didn't see one flushable toilet. And I was in some of the palaces. So that's how bad the, you know, the country had deteriorated under the Ba'ath Party. It was really very, very sad. Another duty that we frequently receive when we would go out is to be a bodyguard for the governor of the province in Tikrit. I just forget the name of the province. It's like a state, but he would go out lots of times into the villages, and I guess he couldn't trust his own guards to provide security, so they would assign soldiers from FOB Spiker to take him out. And I was very, very impressed with the governor, because he seemed very, very dedicated, and he seemed like he really wanted things in Iraq to get better. And we were around him a lot, and we were around his lieutenants a lot. And I just was very impressed. I didn't feel like they were looking for a handout or anything like that. I felt that they were really trying to make things better in Iraq. All of his helpers seemed to be young men in their 20s. They seemed that they were educated. Perhaps they attended the university. I'm not sure if they were active in the Ba'ath Party or anything like that. We never talked politics. And, but they struck me and the other soldiers as well that, you know, they were really trying to do a lot of good in that part of Iraq. And, you know, they would take us to lunch different places, and, you know, we were always worried about what we were eating and all, but it would have been very rude to say, no, we're not going to eat. So we usually ate whatever they gave us. Sometimes we would eat the rice and not the meat and that kind of thing. But, you know, as I say, I was just impressed, and I just thought that they were really trying to do the right thing. I didn't feel that they were trying to shake down the Americans for money or anything like that. Another duty that we frequently took on when we went out into the countryside is there was a military yard not far from FOB Spiker that had been bombed very heavily during the war. And I can only imagine what it was like there during the bombing, because it was just acres and acres of military vehicles that were destroyed, tanks, large tanks, probably 50 or 60 tons in weight, were turned upside down. So you can imagine how powerful these bombs were that the coalition forces dropped during the war. And we would go through there, and there were looters in there. They were members of the Fedayeen. They were terrorists, or they were working for terrorists, trying to get ordnance, trying to cut open bombs, trying to find rocket-propelled grenades, trying to bring them back to the insurgents. And you know, they were in there all the time, every single day. Every time we would go through there, we would chase them, we would arrest them. You know, sometimes we would turn them over to the Iraqi police. Sometimes we would turn them over to our MPs. Sometimes we would let them go, depending on what the Army wanted to do that day. And it was really, you know, we could have been in there full-time chasing these guys. But, you know, there's no doubt that, you know, they were trying to get this ordinance so they could give it to the insurgents. Where Tikrit is located is not far from the Tigris River Valley. The Tigris River Valley it's a valley. Most of Iraq is on a plateau, and as you get close to the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers, there is a river valley. The plateau descends, and then the river valley is like a jungle there. It's very, very lush. The foliage is very, very thick. The trees and the reeds grow right up to the side of the road. When we were driving through there, it would have been very easy for us to be ambushed, and we wouldn't even know where it was coming from. It was so desolate down there. There were villages down there, and it was deathly quiet, very, very quiet. And there was also schools down there. There were schools down there that we used to, you know, pay Iraqi contractors to rebuild and to update. And you know, whenever we were down there, we would, you know, park our vehicles. We would get out of the vehicles. We would dismount, run up into the hills so we could, you know, have a good visual on everything. And the people down there were very standoffish too. They weren't very friendly towards the Americans. And you know, we suspected they were probably you know, scared of us for whatever reason. But you know, that was the Tigris River Valley was very, very interesting. From the top of the plateau, you can see that the river valley probably extended about 2 to 3 miles on each side of the river before, you know, the plateau went up. Another thing that we did frequently is we did a lot of what I call outreach work. We went into the villages, and we received many, many care packages from people here at home. And many of the care packages people sent to us were earmarked for the Marines and for the soldiers. Had things like shaving items, razors, shaving cream, dental floss, toothpaste, toothbrushes, skin lotion, skin sunblock, things like that. And but people also wanted to send us a lot of things for the Iraqi people. And I have a flyer on the back table. If anybody wants to send anything overseas, either to our soldiers, to the Marines, or to the Iraqi people, there's flyers on the back. Looks like this. And there's an address down the bottom there. And you can send that stuff directly. It's a domestic rate. It's not like sending anything overseas. It's an APO. And my buddy is, that's his address. His name is Lieutenant Conte. And he's in Tikrit right now. And if you send anything, he'll make sure it gets to soldiers and Marines, or if you want to send anything to the Iraqi people, they'll be glad to have that. But oh, and there's some boxes in the back. If anybody has anything, you know, you want to donate or you have with you or you want to leave, that would be great too. I will tell you this, because people ask this question all the time. Do those Iraqi people, do they really appreciate what we're doing there? And I would say yes. The ones I met did appreciate what we were doing there. You know, I think that their tolerance and their patience for the American soldiers is getting less and less. We could see that. But, you know, for most of the people that we actually got a chance to know and to talk to, you know, the people were very, very grateful for what we would give them. And, you know, these people literally have nothing. I mean, if you have a McDonald's toy or something like that, I mean, that's like giving them gold. The footwear, they have no shoes at all. You know, they may have sandals or flip-flops or something like that. Frequently, where we were up in Tikrit, the weather does get cold. It goes down to about 30. Further up north in Mosul, it gets even colder where they have snow and it gets freezing cold. But if you ever see on the news, sometimes you see people bundled up in Iraq, it's because it's during the cold season or the rainy season. But even in the cold weather, you know, most of those people, it's flip-flops and sandals. They just can't afford a pair of shoes. And, you know, it was really, you know, very, very sobering to see that. A lot of the little girls were falling in love with our soldiers, the younger soldiers, you know, and they you know, would give the soldiers flowers and gifts and letters and things like that. Most of the Iraqis could speak a little bit of English. Apparently, we were told that Saddam Hussein insisted that children be taught English in the school. I guess he saw that English was, something important to know. So most of the children were able to speak some English. The girls were more adept at English than the boys, but most of them could speak some English. And, the soldiers that really cared to, we used to get together at night and try and learn some Arabic from one another. That way, when we went out into the villages every day, we were able to talk to the kids and converse and communicate a little bit. And, and that really, and it's just like somebody who's learning Spanish or something, even though you're butchering the language and you're making mistakes and your composition might be clumsy, they still appreciate the fact that you're trying to speak some Arabic and, you come out and you're try to help them. Somebody asked me yesterday, and I thought it would be a good thing to talk about today. They asked about females in the Army, and they said, did you ever have any contact with female soldiers? And the answer is yes. I'd say in our company, we probably had, out of 120 soldiers, maybe about 25 or 30 females. And the females are very, very good soldiers. You would have, some people who would say otherwise, but I would totally disagree with that. I mean, the females that I met and with whom I served in Iraq were just excellent soldiers. I mean, as brave and courageous and as hardworking as any of the men. And I would say probably the best officer I ever met over there was a female. She was a reserve or National Guard officer from Colorado. And one day we were out in that yard, that military yard, and we were chasing the thieves and catching the looters and so forth. And we caught some looters, and they had a truck. And apparently whoever owned the truck was a gentleman. We made all the Iraqis sit down, and actually they don't sit down; they kind of squat. But we found out who owned the truck, and she was talking to him, and she wanted to know where he lived, did he own the truck, what were they doing there, what are you going to do with this stuff, this scrap that you're taking out of here, and it was clear that this guy did not appreciate being interviewed by our officer. I mean, she was the ranking officer. And he just didn't like being spoken to like that by this female. And so anyway, this went on for about 3 or 5 minutes, and he got very aggressive with her, and he stepped towards her, and he bumped her with his chest. And she was smoking a cigar, because the cigar keeps the bugs away. But she put the cigar in her mouth, and she pulled out her weapon. She had a pistol, and she whipped out handcuffs. And it happened so fast, we went over to make him move back. And by the time we got there, she had this guy laying on the ground. She had him handcuffed, and she had a pistol behind his ear. And she was really furious that this guy, stepped towards her like that. And but she was really a very, very good officer. She treated the soldiers very, very well, and she was very, very kind to the Iraqi children. The Iraqi children loved her. She knew a little bit of Arabic, and at the end of the day, we would go to the village. We would go to the same village first and last because we would pick up our interpreter. And he would go with us all day long, and he would interpret for us when we'd have trouble communicating. Then at the end of the day, we would go back to that village and drop him off. And we would usually stay there for a little while because it's rude to drop somebody off and then leave. So usually our commanding officer, whoever it was, would go into his house and would have tea, British custom, and we would stay outside, just guard the vehicles, make sure nothing was going on. And, the kids in this village, the children in this village just loved our soldiers. And, it was like mayhem every time we went there. But anyway, this female officer I was telling you about was just very, very kind to the children. The children loved her. They would line up. They wouldn't line up for anything, but they would line up for her, just to talk to her. And they would talk to her in broken English and Arabic, and she was very patient with them. And it was really, just kind of gratifying to see that. But she was very, very strong and a very, very good officer. So, I would say that, collectively speaking, females have served very, very well, in Iraq. I will tell you one other thing, because somebody asked me this question, too. They said, what about gays in the military? I mean, have you encountered many homosexuals and that kind of thing? And in our company, I would say there's probably 2 for sure, and maybe 3 soldiers that would admit to being gay. Now, there's a policy of don't ask, don't tell, but I will tell you this about these soldiers. There was one male, one female, and the other one that we weren't sure of that was a male. But these soldiers were excellent soldiers. There was no doubt in my mind that they were excellent soldiers. One was a mechanic, and he was an excellent mechanic, and the other was a cook, and she also operated a laundry trailer. And you know, they were just very, very talented, and there was really no negative impact on morale because of their orientation or anything like that. And but you know, people ask about that, and that was my observation. I will tell you one thing that really negatively impacts morale, and I was surprised to see this, and I've always been a reservist. This is the first time I've been on active duty. Adultery. You know, there wasn't a lot of adultery over there, but you know, when a soldier is committing adultery, and remember, a lot of the soldiers in our unit lived with one another in Bellefonte, and there was another unit that combined with ours from Williamsport. So a lot of these soldiers knew one another. Many of them went to high school together. They've grown up together. They knew one another's families, and it was not a good thing when you saw somebody committing adultery. And as I say before, there wasn't much of that at all. But that had a much more negative impact on morale than any kind of the other thing that I mentioned. So, but you know, people ask me those questions all the time, and that's the answer on that. You know, soldiers, you know, when you see a soldier engaged, not actively engaged in adultery, but having a relationship that's inappropriate, and you know the soldier's wife, or you know the soldier's children, or you know the soldier's family, you know, that soldiers take that very hard. That is not good for morale. And you know, soldiers get very angry at the soldier who's committing adultery, and you might think, well, you know, that's their personal business. Well, not really. It's affecting a family here, and you know, it's very, very hard for a deployment period for a husband and wife to be apart. And you know, when you're injecting that kind of activity in it, it's really, you know, the reunions are hard enough emotionally. But that's I'm not making that up. Another question I get frequently is, what about abuse of Iraqis? Did you ever see any of this? And the answer is yes. I did see some of it. I suspect that there's probably as much abuse of Iraqis as there was in World War II, as there was in Korea, as there was in Vietnam, and as much as there was in any other conflict. It's a little bit different here because the world's watching. You know, if something bad happens this afternoon, it's on CNN this evening. So the United States has to be very, very meticulous about, you know, how they treat Iraqis and so forth. But, you know, before a soldier or a unit is deployed or sent overseas, a soldier really is only given about 50 minutes of training in what they call cultural awareness. And for a young kid, 17 or 18 years old, you know, what does he or she know about the Arabic culture? What do they know about a Muslim? You know, they've never met a Muslim. They've never been out of Williamsport or Bellefonte. And 50 minutes of cultural awareness training just is not going to cut it. And I think a lot of times that's how that happens. And also, you know, a lot of it has to do with bad leadership. You know, abuse of local nationals is a very dirty thing. You know, if you see a soldier acting out or pushing around an Iraqi or pushing around a local national, we call them, you know, if you're an NCO, a non-commissioned officer, or you're an officer, you need to make that stop right away. And I think a lot of officers didn't do that. I think, as I say before, because it's a dirty thing. There's forms to fill out. There's Article 15s. There's court-martials you could go to. And I think, you know, a lot of times the Army is reluctant to take that on. And I think that's how that situation in that prison in Baghdad festered and got worse. You know, granted, people say, well, geez, they do it to us. They do even worse to us. And maybe that's true and maybe it's not. But the world's not watching them. They're watching us. And, you know, for a country to, you know, attempt to take the higher moral ground, you really have to be very, very, as I say, meticulous and attentive to, you know, how everybody is treating local nationals. And I will tell you this, you know, for the most part, you know, the Iraqis, the local nationals are very, very afraid of Americans. You know, you could stamp your foot at them and then they would cower. They would put their hands up or lie on the ground because they were so scared of the Americans. And many of the children were like that too until they get to know you and they know that you have candy and you have toys and you have care packages for them and things like that. You know, a lot of times the kids won't come near you. They won't shake your hand or they'll watch you from a distance. before they come up and talk to you and say, hey, mister, give me one, or mister, give me one, mister, give me one. And, but there, you know, there was some cases of that. And like I said before, I think the reporting procedure is not good. Also, you know, the military, the federal government has what they call whistleblower protection, where if you see something going wrong, not just in Iraq, but it could be any place, stateside, any post. It doesn't have to be military. It could be a civilian. But if you see somebody being sexually harassed, if you see somebody wasting government property, if you see somebody mistreating a government employee, you're supposed to be able to blow the whistle on this person and not face any kind of retaliation or retribution. Well, as anybody who's ever been in the military, you know that there's lots of ways you can put the pressure on somebody. If somebody wants to file a complaint, you could say, if you want this complaint to go through, you're going to end up being in Iraq 2 extra months. Now, what do you want to do? Do you want to file a complaint, or do you want to forget about it? And this young soldier is going to say, forget about it. I want to go home. So there's lots of ways you can apply pressure on people. Or you could say, you know what? I got this duty for you. It's cleaning the latrines. And you're going to do that for like the next 3 months or so. And you say, well, you know what? I think I'm going to withdraw that complaint. But there's lots of ways to apply pressure to people. And, you know, I think that the Army really needs to be, you know, a little more meticulous about that. I will tell you this. We picked up an Iraqi woman once, and this woman told our interpreter that, I don't know whether it was her husband or her son, it had to be her husband because she didn't look old enough to have a son that would have been in jail. And she said her relative was in jail, and she needed to go see him. She wanted to know where he was being held, and so we took her to a Marine Corps prison. And the Marine Corps prison is what you think it would be. Very orderly, very sanitary, very tidy. They run a very good prison, the Marines. And so anyway, the officer in charge of this prisoner jail came out, and it was a female. And she was talking to us. She wasn't talking to me, but I could hear her talking to the interpreter. And she was saying that, you know, you can't see him. He is here. You can't see him. You can't see him. And she finally let him see whoever it was, son or husband. And but I did hear her say this, and this is before any of those problems at that prison took place in Baghdad. She said, you should be lucky. You should be fortunate that he's not at Abu Ghraib. And, you know, I think back like, you know, this Marine officer, somebody knew that things were not right at that prison in Baghdad. And this is way before anybody ever sent home any of those pictures about those prisoner abuses. But this female officer knew something was going on there. And, you know, I didn't see anything like that at that Marine Corps prison. As I say, they seem to run a very orderly operation. But, you know, I think of that now, and I'm reminded about how, you know, they knew that something may have been going on at that time. Another thing is we were very much in need of communications. You know, we would have a convoy, 40 or 50 vehicles long, and we'd have 2 radios in the entire convoy. We'd have one at the front, or maybe one in the middle, and maybe one at the very end. And if there was a roadside explosion or something like that, you know, it's possible that it would be in a few minutes sometimes before somebody could see that we were under attack. And we used to take to writing home or emailing home saying, we need walkie-talkies. And people would send us those little handheld walkie-talkies you buy at Walmart or someplace else. And we would hook them on our uniforms so we could communicate. You know, by way of the walkie-talkies. And otherwise, you know, we would have 2 radios in the entire convoy, and that certainly was not even close to being safe. And that's just assuming that the radios were functional. We never had any armor or anything like that. We had protective vests. They weren't Kevlar vests, but they were protective vests. And never any armor on any of our Humvees, our trucks, our trailers, or anything like that. That never came till later on. How about some questions? Yes, sir.
Do you have enough vests now? Is there enough armor on the Humvees?
The question is, are there enough vests now, and is there armor on the Humvees? And the answer is, I don't know. I think that everybody probably has a vest. I don't think it's a Kevlar vest, which is the bulletproof type that cover your torso and your midsection and so forth. We had those at the end, but they had no plates in them. It was like wearing a fishing vest. And they handed them out, and the order was, wear the vest. So the soldiers would wear the vest, but there was no plates. The plates slide down in front like this and protect you from any kind of explosion or projectiles or bullets or anything like that. And we never had the armor. Some of us never had the vest. When I actually left Iraq, one of our sergeants was a police officer in Williamsport, and he gave me a bulletproof vest that he had. It was a civilian vest that he had from the police department, because I went down before he did, and I didn't have a vest. So it was a bulletproof vest and had Velcro strips on the side, and that's what I wore back to Kuwait. But I didn't have a protective vest because we had to turn them over to the Iraqi police and to the Iraqi army and so forth. But I call it a protective vest, but it wasn't a, it wasn't bulletproof or anything like that. The other question was about armor, and I think that they're more. I'll be honest with you, I'm not so sure. I think the armor is much more plentiful now than it was when I was there. I hear they're not letting any vehicles into Iraq without armor. But you know what? Unless that young soldier asked that question to Secretary Rumsfeld on national TV, I'm not so sure that that situation may have ever improved. I'm not making that up. That's just my belief. It's on national TV, and a soldier asked a question. Yeah, a reporter put him up to ask the question, but it was a good question. It was a very good question. You know, I think it's $2 billion a week we're spending there, and, you know, we're without armor, without communications. You know, where's this money going? Yes, sir.
What do you think it's going to take to bring this conflict to a conclusion?
Okay, the question is, what will it take to bring the conflict to conclusion? I would say, and I'm not an expert, but I would tell you two things. Number one is the Iraqis have to step up and take over security. Nobody else is coming to our aid. No Germans, no Dutch, no French, no Italians, although I think the Italians are still there, but 2,000 soldiers, I mean, that's not a whole lot when we have 140,000 there. But, you know, none of the Europeans are coming in to support us here. The only way out is for the Iraqis to come forward. And, you know, I don't know how quickly they're training them. I can't believe they're not training them faster. Many of the Iraqis are probably not too eager to get involved in the security forces yet because they fear for their own safety. They fear for their family safety. But I think that's one thing. The Iraqis have to step up and take over security. The next thing is economic. You know, these people need jobs. And, you know, nobody is going to invest there. None of these major corporations are going to invest in Iraq until it's a safe and it's a secure place to be. You know, who wants to send employees like engineers and technicians and plumbers and electricians and carpenters and people like that, trained and skilled labor into a country where, you know, people are going to get killed and you're not sure if you're, you know, going to get out of there alive or not. And I just don't see that happening until the situation is more secure and more safe. Yes, sir. Does that answer your question? Like I say. Yes, sir.
Okay, Mr. Murt, thank you for your presentation. And my question is, where or what source would you use for water for your showers and so on? In a desert area, I guess.
Good question. What we used to do is, since laundry and showers were really a high priority item, we really had as much water as we wanted. On our post was a well, was a cistern, and there were water trucks the Army operated, and they would fill up the water trucks, and then they would come over to the laundry site, and we would have large, we called them bladders. It was like a swimming pool, really. It was an inflatable swimming pool, very, very large, and the truck would fill up the bladder, and then we would use the water to wash the clothes. And then the excess water was discharged. We didn't have, nowadays, the new laundry trailers the Army has the technology to recycle all this water. So they're much more efficient. We had the old trailers, and that water had to be discharged into actually we discharged our water into a grove of trees. The trees were very, very green from all the water being discharged there. Does that answer your question? Okay. For drinking, we had bottled water. There were a few times where the water was not plentiful, and they told us, you know, a couple liters a day. But for the most part, you know, the water was on skids, and you know, we could drink as much water as we wanted. In the beginning, there was no refrigeration. There was no cold water or anything like that. You know, you just drank whatever you can. We used to come up with different ways to try and chill the water. We used to dig a big ditch and line the outside with shale. They said it was shale. It was some kind of rock. And then they would put the water inside. And it would keep the, you know, would make it chilled, but it really wasn't cold or anything like that.
Lister bags would have worked well.
Lister bags? Yeah. Yes, sir.
Is being governor or any other politician a very high hazard occupation?
Over there, the question is being an elected official, governor or village elder, high risk occupation? The answer is yes, it is. Especially if they see the soldiers coming to your house every single day. You know, we went out to the village elder's house, the interpreter, one morning, and there was a rocket-propelled grenade that was leaning against his front door, and somebody laid it there. It didn't look like they shot it, but they laid it there. And, you know, somebody was obviously trying to give him a message that you better stop going out with these Americans. And another time there was graffiti on the side of his wall, and they said it was something like death to Abu Ali, who was the village elder. And he was really, you know, we paid him to be our interpreter, but he didn't make much money. It was really a very, very high risk kind of duty for him. And you know, I remember when we left, he was in tears. He was very emotional. He was crying because, you know, there was a lot of uncertainty. He didn't know about the next wave of soldiers coming in. Were they going to be as friendly as we were? And it was just, you know, kind of emotional and kind of touching when we had to leave that day, because he was very, very sad, and his family was sad too. I will tell you this about the Iraqis, and the Iraqi people are very family-oriented, you know, very, very clannish, but I mean that in a good way, where, you know, they look after one another, very, very large families, I should say very, very large, but I mean 10, 12 children is very, very common, and the older siblings look out for the younger siblings, and you know, the parents are very, very proud of large families. There was one father I met, and you know, he knew enough English to tell me, you know, I have 15 children, and you know, I was telling him, that's great, you know, you should be really proud. And I knew his children, and every son or daughter he had was very well behaved and were very mannered. They didn't push, they didn't shove, and but it was, you know, that's something that really struck me. Somebody else had a question? Yes, sir.
Two questions. Number one, did you have electric available for your laundry machine, or did you do it like hand or machine?
Question is, what about electric? We had generators.
A generator
Yeah,
behind your machine?
very powerful generators, which ran on diesel.
Okay, the second question I'd like to know, in your opinion, where are you seeing the abuse of the Iraqis by certain soldiers? Was this, or in any cases, or was it caused by anger that had been caused maybe by losing a buddy or yourself or something like that? Or is it just the nature
Let me
of the
just,
people?
I would say it was the nature of the soldier. I'll just cite one example. Before any kind of local national can come on our post, they had to be patted down. And, you know, we would pat down their uniform, or not their uniform, but whatever they're wearing, feel down their turban, and just make sure they were not bringing in any kind of alcohol or weapons or anything like that. And the last case I saw, a soldier had an Iraqi, was standing him up, was slapping him, hitting him, knocking him around, and you know, there was no reason for it. And I told the soldier, I said, he doesn't understand. The soldier was yelling at him in his face. I said, he doesn't understand. You know, you have to show him. But if you, I will tell you this, we're just getting back to the abuse thing. If you treat the Iraqis with respect and with dignity, and if they see you being kind to their children, when we used to go out to these villages, they used to tell us all kinds of military intelligence, not rumors or anything like that, but they would tell us lots of information about where mortar attacks came from, like the night before, they know when somebody's being mortared, the ground shakes. And they would tell us, they would tell one of the interpreters, and they would be, you know, jabbering on in Arabic, and we'd say, whoa, whoa, slow down, slow down. And we'd call over the interpreter and say, what's he saying, what's he saying? And they would tell us, well, he said, the mortar came from over there last night, around 2300 hours, and they came from the Tigris River Valley. And this information was always passed back to, you know, to higher headquarters, to intelligence, for the MPs to look into, because, you know, we were just out on patrol. We weren't responsible for this, but for that. But the point is that this information started to flow after you kind of build a relationship with them. You know, if you go into a village and start knocking people around and humiliating people, you're not going to get anything. They're not going to give you the time of day. Same thing in a prison. You know, somebody said in the FBI recently, after this prison scandal became public, they said the only thing you ever get by torturing a prisoner is pain. There's no way this guy is going to give you the God's honest truth. If he knows a little bit of information and he thinks it's of use to you, he's going to embellish it. And he's going to make it seem very, very important just to get you from stop beating him or humiliating him or taking pictures of him without his clothes on or whatever the case may be. But that case that I told you about, I reported that. I reported that soldier. And I never knew what happened to him, but I did report him to be very honest with you, I reported him twice. I reported him to his sergeant, and the sergeant, you know what the sergeant told me? His sergeant said, his hands are probably cold. That's why he's knocking this Iraqi around. So I reported him to JAG, and JAG said it was a court-martialable offense, and I did my duty on that one. But his sergeant also told me, he said, come on, Sarge, he said, we're moving out to Mosul soon. He said, you know, don't get all excited about this. This was a construction worker. This wasn't a terrorist. This was just a local national, a guy coming on post to do masonry work and things like that, and all the buildings that had been bombed out. Yes, ma'am.
I have two questions. How was the water purified for the use of food and for your laundry? The second question was, the interpreters, were they educated in English to speak, or did they just pick it up from the army?
Let me answer the first one first about the water. How was the water purified? The answer is, I'm not sure. Now that you mention it, the cafeteria was a Quonset hut, very, very large building put up. It was kind of a prefab kind of thing. And out back, we could see they had all kinds of equipment and generators and things like that. And I'm assuming they had some kind of water purification system. And I never heard of any cases of Potomac poisoning.
There was no dysentery, or there was no...
I personally never heard of any, to be honest. Yeah, I never, I mean, we were encouraged, drink, drink, drink. You know, by the time you're thirsty, you're already partially dehydrated. So, you know, there used to be different times where the sergeant would say, okay, everybody drink. I'm not thirsty. Drink. You must drink. And, you know, a lot of soldiers would have powder, like Kool-Aid or Gatorade, and they would mix it up in the bottle because we would drink bottled water. And when we had refrigeration, they would, you know, like freeze half the bottle, and that way it would be kind of chilled all day long. We would be out on our patrols. Now, the other question was, I forget. Oh, the interpreters. Well, the interpreters were a variety. We had some soldiers who could speak Arabic. There was a soldier from New York, he was from Long Island, who was, I don't know whether he was Syrian or what his nationality or ancestry was, but he could speak Arabic. He didn't like going out. It was kind of ironic. I thought, well, here's a guy that can talk with the people. I mean, he should really enjoy going out. He didn't like going out. He kind of went out under duress. And he was a young soldier. He was an E4, and he was a really nice guy. And he was a reservist. And it was just kind of ironic that he didn't like going out. There was also a federal employee from Atlanta, Georgia. He was never in the military. He was assigned, or he volunteered for duty in Iraq, and he was a civilian. I guess he was assigned to headquarters, and he did other things. I think he worked in supply and logistics and transportation. But he was Syrian. He told me he was part Syrian. He was probably in his 50s, but he would go out with us, and going out with him was always very interesting because he would give us a history lesson. And he would, draw Iraq on the ground in the sand, and he would, tell us about the different tribes and why they don't get along and why it's important to be kind to the children and reach out to the children. And it was really, it was really interesting when he would go out. And he was, because he used to wear an Army uniform, but he didn't carry a weapon or anything. And he had a big barrel chest and a big stomach. And he looked kind of like Santa Claus. But we would go into the city of Tikrit, downtown Tikrit, which is really not a nice place to be. And he would start talking to the kids in Arabic, and the kids would say, "Whoa, there's a soldier who knows Arabic." And he was very, very good with the children. During Ramadan, and I don't understand a whole lot about the Muslim faith, but during the daylight hours, during the Ramadan observance, Muslims that observe do not eat, drink, or smoke. And then at sundown, when the sun goes down, I think they have like a little gathering with their family or with their neighbors. And I guess it's like a little barbecue, and they celebrate, and I guess they say prayers and so forth. And they celebrate. And we were in Tikrit one Sunday, and it was during the Ramadan, and some soldiers were doing work at a school. And it was getting dark, and I'm not sure why we stayed there that late, but it was starting to get dusk, and you could hear the parties, like in the neighborhoods and stuff, and we started to hear gunfire. And I guess it was celebratory gunfire, where they're celebrating and shooting weapons in the air like Saddam used to do. And it was kind of interesting. It was actually kind of scary because as it got darker, there was more and more gunfire. And, we got out of there just in time. And, we were joking on the way out. We said, this is like the Wild West with all the shooting and stuff. And you hear all the parties. It sounds like saloons and things like that. But we were really happy to get home that day. Another question? Oh, yes, ma'am.
You mentioned the poverty of the country, no food, etc. I always thought it was an oil-rich country.
Did everyone hear? The question was, what about this poverty? I think they have 12 or 15% of the world's oil, and I don't know the answer, but in addition to the poverty, the gas lines are like they were in this country back in the 70s. I'm old enough to remember the gas lines. And they used to send us into Tikrit where the gas stations were, and they would say, you guys got to restore order because, there's Iraqis trying to butt into line, and there's people with like gallon jugs, milk containers trying to jump into line to get gas, and then they water it down and sell it down the street. And, we were supposed to try and restore order, and the Iraqis were fighting among themselves, like you jumped in front of me, and it was really, tensions were very, very high. But it made you wonder, why are there long gas lines here in a country that has, 12 or 15% of the world's oil? And I'm not sure of that. I guess over the years, and again, I'm not sure, I don't know the answer, but, any of the money that Saddam made from the oil industry probably got squandered on his family, his sons, the Ba'ath Party, his palaces, and so forth. And the palace in Tikrit City really had to be an engineering feat to build. It overlooks the Tigris River, and it was built on a large mound, looks like red clay. And at the bottom of the hill, there's a barbed wire fence that has razor ribbon on the top, and the palace is on the right. And to the left was like the worst third world poverty you could imagine. And it was just kind of ironic. I mean, here's a palace, and you think, how can you look out the palace window and not have compassion and pity on these people that are living in poverty right next door? But that's the way it was.
Second part, you're not going to like this one. What would happen if the forces, the coalition forces, withdrew? They weren't there. Would there still be violence, and who would it be directed at?
Okay, that's a good question. Why did you think I would be not like that question? That's a good one. The question is, what happens if we just withdrew, if all the coalition forces just withdrew right now? And the answer is, I'm not sure, but probably the bad guys would take over. I would think that, the former Baathists would take over. And, you know, Iraq, in many regards, is a country of thugs and bullies, where people that are the strongest, people that are the biggest or the toughest, take over villages. We would see this when we would, you know, be giving out stuff to the kids. We'd have a truck full of, you know, candy and stuff for the children, and, you know, we would get them lined up, and somebody would just walk to the front of the line and, like, stand there and just say, give me one, give me one. That's like, and a kid would be like 12 or 13 years old, and, you know, I'd say, get out of here. And frequently what I would do is I would grab him by the shoulder, and I would drag him out of line and walk him to the back. And if he wanted anything, he would have to wait at the end of the line. And, you know, the little kids love this, because this is like, you know, a little bit of justice that they never see in these villages. But, you know, we had kids where, you know, I'm talking about little kids, like toddlers, 5, 6 years, well, maybe 3, 4 years old. And, you know, we were giving out candy and stuff like that, and somebody would, like, ride a bike right in the front of the line. He'd say, give me one. That's like, you know, what part of this do you not understand? Go to the end of the line. And, but that is very, very common in the villages. And we would never tolerate this. But towards the end, I mean, we would go out there almost every day. Towards the end, the bullies wouldn't even come out. They wouldn't even come out. Sometimes we would be driving in the village at the end of the day, and we would see them leave. They wouldn't even come out into the village square, because they knew that, you know, they weren't going to get anything unless they got to the end of the line. And, you know, that's kind of a blow for justice, but it is very much a country of bullies and thugs. And, you know, that will take years to undo.
But they weren't there before we invaded. The insurgents were not there.
Well, I'll tell you, I think, and I don't know this to be true, but the comment was the insurgents weren't there before we showed up, and probably before we showed up, the insurgents were the ones who were in charge. So, and I don't know that to be a fact, but I would bet a lot of the insurgents now were the ones who were part of Saddam's organization, the Ba'ath Party, and so forth. One thing that, you know, I think that we did wrong is we imprisoned a lot of people that never committed crimes. You know, there's a lot of people that were put in jail and held there because, you know, we swept the village, or we swept an area that we thought was terrorist or Fedayeen, and we arrested everybody and put them in jail. And, you know, after the Abu Ghraib prison scandal, a lot of these people were let out. And I have no doubt a lot of these people that were in prison unfairly, probably went with the insurgents. So it's, you know, very, very important, I think, when we deliver justice, that we do so very judiciously and, you know. Yes, Don?
Who took over in Vietnam when we fought out there?
Well, the Vietnamese took over, I mean, the South Vietnamese, but they didn't last very long.
Well, that's our enemies today, are the insurgents. They'll take over.
In Iraq?
Yeah.
I believe they would, yeah. I really don't see any way out. I mean, the only way, I mean, people say, oh, just pull out. I just think the whole thing would crash and burn. Yeah. And, you know, people say, well, you need to get the Europeans in, and you need to get the German, you know, nobody is coming. Nobody is coming. The only way out is to get the Iraqis to stand up and take responsibility for security, and that's a very, very hard thing to do. And I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Brent Scowcroft. He used to be a national security advisor. He was on TV the other day. He said 10 years. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but to me, you know, I don't think it's unrealistic. Yes, sir.
How do you tell the good guys from the bad guys?
Well, I will tell you this. You know, I personally am very, very wary of anybody who's carrying a weapon, even if the guy has an Iraqi police uniform on. And, you know, I know we're working alongside them and all, but every time, you know, I would see an Iraqi police officer or soldier with a weapon, you know, I would be on guard. And sometimes they would let us, we'd say, hey, can we see that AK-47? And they'd say, yeah, sure. Because, you know, I never held an AK-47 before, and, you know, it's a nice weapon and all, but I would still be very, very wary of anybody. But your question is, how do you tell the good guys from the bad guys? And the rules of engagement are not easy. I mean, you can't expect somebody 17 or 18 years old to understand these complicated rules of engagement that, you know, you have to mark your target. I mean, we would be in some of these villages and we'd be getting sniped at and things like that, but you can't shoot back. You just can't start shooting down the street. You've got to say that, you know, if this is the guy that shot at me, I can mark my target and I can engage him. But I just can't start shooting, you know, down the street because somebody fired at me from a doorway and jumped back in the doorway or went inside their house. So the rules of engagement are, you know, a little complicated that way. You know, if a convoy is hit by a roadside bomb, you can see the insurgents in the field. You're not allowed to go out and engage them. We've had soldiers that were lured into traps out there, so you've got to stay on the hard top. You've got to stay on the road. Yes, sir.
Can you reflect on the election results as we know?
I would not be. I don't feel qualified to give you any kind of good evaluation on that. And I'll be honest with you, I really don't watch a lot of the news too much anymore. I just find it a little bit disconcerting. But apparently, the election went off with minor hitches, and I think that it's a real testament that the people in that magnitude came out to vote, and you know, I think that's a positive thing. But you know, on the other hand, you know, a free election is not going to turn the country around overnight. There's so many things wrong.
It looks to me like the guys that we didn't like are the majority.
That could be. That could be. That's the risk you take with a free election, I guess. Yes, sir.
I have a question before you leave.
Sure.
You mentioned AK-45,
47.
47, whatever they are. Back to the streets. Where do they get these weapons? Has anybody found out? We don't make them, right? That's
No,
the weapon
no,
of the
that's,
United
well,
States.
it used to be a Soviet weapon. It was a communist weapon. I don't know whether they get them from Syria or where Saddam was getting all his arms from, but I would bet that the Pentagon knows. I mean, they could probably tell just by how a weapon is manufactured, or the model, or the serial number, if they have serial numbers. But that's a good question. But, you know, Saddam was probably, you know, wheeling and dealing to get weapons from everybody. And I wouldn't doubt they had M16s. I know back when Ronald Reagan was president, they were finding weapons in Central America, M16s, that belonged to us in Vietnam. The Sandinistas were using M16s that somehow they got that were captured in Vietnam back in the 70s. And that was maybe 10 years later. So,
Just out of curiosity, what did you get paid?
I think I made like,
Money or their money?
no, they paid us in American money. It was all direct deposit. It was all direct deposit overseas. But I think my pay was maybe like $3,000, $2,000 to $3,000 a month, something like that.
How did you go into a store and buy anything?
Well, you would have to use American money, but you could. They did after a while. They set up a finance section where you could go and get an advance on your pay. And to be honest with you, you didn't need to buy much. You know, so many people were sending us care packages. You never had to buy toothpaste. I mean, there was always. We used to get these care packages, and you know, if soldiers got 5 tubes of toothpaste, they didn't need that many. They would probably just get into the command post, the CP. We kept everything in a big box. If you needed toothpaste or hand sanitizer or whatever, you know, we would put everything in the big box, and you know, soldiers would draw out of there. But you could get something at the PX. They did set up the PX after a while. The lines were very, very long, but you know, they did set up a PX. We had one. Yes, sir. Oh, yes, sir.
Schools participation.
Okay, who wants to go first?
Schools and participation.
Schools and participation, I would say sporadic. My observation was that it seemed like the males went to school more frequently than the females. Females frequently stopped going around, I'd say, 11, 12, 13. They were expected to stay home, help their parents with child care and duties around the house. When we used to go out to the villages, I used to ask the kids, all right, who went to school today? And everybody would raise their hand. And I could see the girls, you know, arguing. I could see this one girl telling this other girl, her name was Mona, I remember her name. And she was obviously telling her in Arabic, you didn't go to school today, you didn't go to school today, don't take the candy. And You know, but we always gave somebody everything. We always gave everybody something. But I knew that they were arguing about Mona didn't go to school that day, and Nada was telling me, don't give her anything. You know, she didn't go to school. Does that answer your question? A lot of the young boys around adolescence stop going to school and start working, and they work in maybe a garage. They work in maybe semi-skilled or unskilled labor on a construction site, mixing mortar and things like that. It's a very, very, very hard existence. You know, everything is done by hand. You know, they mix the mortar and all that kind of thing by hand. And even on the construction sites, you know, everybody's wearing sandals and flip-flops, and you know, there's many of the Iraqis you could see are missing fingers and toes, and you know, obviously from accidents that they've had on the job. You can't help. I'm sorry?
I think they're missing brains.
Well, you can't help, at least for me, I think most soldiers felt the same way. You can't help but feel, you know, compassion and pity, you know, on these people, because really they have nothing. And yes, sir.
Don't we that take place over there in our service fund?
I'm sorry.
The adultery that takes place, is that inter-service or is it with local?
No, it was inter-service. Yeah, there really was not. I didn't see. I've heard of a soldier marrying an Iraqi woman, but I don't know how that would happen, because, you know, we were told not. Well, you know, it was kind of understood, you know, not to gawk or to leer at an Iraqi female. Most of the females were covered up anyway, except their face. There were a few that were covered up except their eyes, and there were many that wore Western clothes, you know, that weren't covered up at all. But, you know, most of our soldiers knew not to, you know, stare or look at an Iraqi woman inappropriately. And all of our soldiers, I never saw any soldier act inappropriate around an Iraqi female. Some of the girls in some of the villages, you know, that were maybe 15 or 16 would, you know, make a big fuss over our soldiers, and, you know, would want to touch your uniform and, you know, touch your face and things like that. And, but, you know, most of them were very, very reserved. And we knew that, you know, we were being looked at, and any kind of inappropriate action would have been, you know, problematic. Now, I will tell you this. Some of the Iraqi young men, like 15, 16 years old, would inappropriately treat our female soldiers. You know, like when we would go out to the villages, you know, sometimes you can't tell a soldier's female because of the helmet and all, but once they know you're female, you know, they get right in your face, and, you know, they want to talk to you, and they want to look at you, get real close to you, and, you know, sometimes they start touching your uniform and all, and we would have to go up and tell them, you know, move back, move back, move back. And I don't know whether they thought that American women were promiscuous or whatever the case may be, but there were cases where they would pinch some of our female soldiers on the bottom, and you know, would have to go over and, you know, tell them to back off, and, you know, let them know that was not going to be tolerated. But, you know, it was a little bit ironic because, you know, our soldiers are taught to be very polite and respectful of any kind of Iraqi woman, and here some of the young men are being, you know, a little too aggressive with some of our female soldiers. And, you know, a lot of our female soldiers were strong enough and assertive enough to take care of themselves, and, you know, would think nothing of pushing somebody in the chest that got too close. But, you know, some of our female soldiers were not. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to ask about the textbooks in the schools. What kind of education or information are in those textbooks? Is it geography or a specific subject?
I would say the question was about the subjects that they teach in the schools, and the answer is I think they teach everything. The textbooks that I saw still had Saddam's picture on the front, but we had nothing else to give them. We didn't know what was in the textbook. It could have been bath party propaganda. I don't know, but it could have been hate the Americans. But you know, Saddam's picture was on the textbook. They also had, believe it or not, little pieces of slate about this big, and a little piece of chalk or a stone, and they would, practice writing Arabic on it and practice their numbers and arithmetic and so forth. And, we used to joke, we'd say, geez, this is like the Flintstones, And, but they were still using little pieces of slate.
Do you think that the Army or whoever is in charge of the next, say, 8 to 10 years of occupation are prepared to teach the young children about our country?
The question is, who's ever taking over for the next 8 or 10 years, however long we're going to be there, are they going to be working on curriculum and things like that? And the answer is, I'm not sure, but I hope so. I sometimes think that the Americans don't want to get too deeply into Iraqi government, the Ministry of Education. I mean, that's really their responsibility. We can't run their schools. We can't run their villages. And, we should be trying to withdraw out of there as quickly and as safely as possible. But you're right about that. I mean, there are, there's countries and schools in the Middle East that have a map that doesn't show Israel. I mean, as far as they're concerned, Israel doesn't exist. And, that kind of hatred is just, really, I mean, we have an opportunity to do something positive towards that end right now.
Well, never mind that even if Israel lets get this generation to begin to love us.
Yeah, and I think that by these missions into the villages where we were, able to interact with the kids and all, I really think that we did a lot of good there. I really do. I got a letter from my buddy who's still in Tikrit that some of the kids sent me, and I couldn't read it because it was in Arabic. And so I had a student over at Penn State who's Egyptian, and I said, can you read this? He said, no, but my mother can. So he brought it home, and his mother translated the letter, and it was a very, very, it was a love letter, from these kids to me. And it was, very, very touching that they felt that way about me, and they remembered me. I was surprised they even remembered me. But it was, it was a very nice letter they wrote. I personally would like to go back there someday, not as a soldier, but I would like to go back maybe as part of a senatorial delegation or something, but I would love to go back to those villages where we were. How about some pictures? Okay? I'm going to have to ask that we turn the lights down. Okay?
First we gotta get it up.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna have to be out after a little bit. Let's see, I've got you down here. Photo.
Oh, thank you.
Splendid.
Thank you.
You're a good speaker.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right.
What do you want?
Can you double click on that? There we go.
Enlarge it.
Do you really?
Teach at the Learning Center.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
If everybody can see this, this is one of the villages. These are some of the kids to work with. It's kind of what the village looks like. Through the house back. You can see, whenever we go out, we're always carrying loaded weapons. I was very, very nervous having the weapons around the kids because... Okay, great.
The thumb button right there.
All right. Because, it doesn't take much. I always had my weapon on safe, but it doesn't take much to turn that switch to semi and for somebody to pull that trigger. So you really had to be careful, having those weapons around the kids. This little girl's mother wrote me a letter at the end before I left. And she asked me to get her an automobile. And, it broke my heart because to get one. But I did get a refrigerator. And this girl and this girl, this is that girl Mona I told you about. They're brother and sister. And they're one of about 12 or 13. This is girls from a big family, too. All these Western clothes are things that we gave them, the sweatsuit. This dress is no doubt homemade. But you can see, in the cold weather, the girls will bundle up. They'll wear 2 or 3 dresses or a another one, Don.
Okay, let me
Yeah, some of the same characters. Yeah. That was our Humvee, yeah. You saw that girl may have had, she has sergeant stripes on her collar. Yeah, I had a picture of my family in there. I'm sure that's what he's looking at. Yes, please. These kids are very photogenic. If you'll see some of the girls with jewelry and so forth. Remember, I mentioned to you that there are a lot of bullies in this culture, and for the longest time we were giving out candy, and we would give candy to a little girl, and a boy would come up and just like rip it right out of her hands. And you know, the girls are at the bottom of the food chain there. You know, they're told, you know, I guess just take that kind of treatment. Many times the kids would be lining up and the girls wouldn't even get in line. They'd wait till the boys got candy, then they would come forward. And not every girl would accept that. Some of the girls would. Yeah, that one right there, she would fight. She had no problem with fighting. But the point I wanted to make is that I was trying to think, well, what can we give these little girls that the boys won't take?